it just occurred to me that we are singing Christmas songs and thinking about Christmas, and all of a sudden we jump to Jesus being 12 years old. And sometimes we are given these texts and we think, how does this connect? And I was thinking as I was just sitting there, life goes on. Life keeps moving. Jesus didn't stay in the manger forever. He grew in divine and human favor. We see the very human side of Jesus through this story and through his growth in these early years. And I think that was really important when Luke was telling his side of the gospel, for that to be a part of it. So do not fret. We'll go flash back to the Magi next week. But this week we're thinking a little bit about Jesus' life. And what we're going to talk about today is this sort of differentiation that happens. Early on in our lives, we learn to differentiate between things. Sometimes we learn opposites, black and white. Sometimes we learn things that complement each other, like gray and green. But this is an important skill. It's something we need to learn how to do, to differentiate between things. And it's neither good nor bad in and of itself. It's how our brains work. They build on what we already know. So when we learn one thing, we learn how it's similar to another thing or different from that thing. There is, of course, a shadow side to this, an extreme that we see in things like bigotry and racism and exceptionalism, that is, thinking you're automatically better than someone else or more worthy than someone else based on who you are or where you come from. These can be troubles in our society, and we see this all the time. But this is only the shadow side, the very negative side of this being able to differentiate things. In fact, we need to be able to differentiate things, and I want to illustrate this with a few sort of visual puzzles that you might see. So there's this one. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, and you have been asked, which line is longer? Anybody know? Okay, it sounds like some of you have seen this before. They're actually the same. If you were to remove the ends, they'd be the same, but our brains do these weird things when comparing and seeing the ones going in and the ones going out. It makes our brains think that one is longer than the other. Okay, here's another visual puzzle. Can you spot a mistake here? Anybody spot it? What is it? There's two spots? Yeah, there's the 4 and the 8 are different colors. And if we were following a pattern, well, actually, I guess that's a little weird in a couple ways. They mixed up the numbers and the colors a little bit for us. So your brain is already picking up on these differences. Now, in this one, how many triangles do you see? I see 4. You see the triangle that's kind of in the background, and then there's a triangle that's in the foreground, but it doesn't have lines around it. And so it makes a space in the circles and in the lines. So our brains, again, are trying to work this out. And visually, the visual part of our brain is probably panicking because there's not supposed to be a white triangle on a white background. Who does this sort of thing? But this is a cognitive test, and it's our brains learning to compare and contrast things. Now, why did I bring this up? Well, because when we read the Bible, it's actually important for us to compare and contrast things there. It can be quite enlightening when we start reading Bible stories. For example, we had our story today with Jesus in the temple, learning and asking questions with the religious leaders and teachers. And then there's this other altercation that Jesus has near the end of his ministry when he's praying in the garden, and he is confronted by the religious leaders and teachers. So we have this sort of contrasting situation going on. So it's the same in both story in that they take place just after observing the Passover, an important holiday in the Jewish calendar. Now, the difference is that Jesus doesn't stay in the temple. He goes to the garden. But this has become a holy place. And this is one of the ways in which we see Jesus expanding God's presence beyond just the temple. That one can connect with God, with Jesus, outside of the temple in this way on the Mount of Olives or in the Garden of Gethsemane, depending on which gospel you're reading. And a third thing I want to point out, that rather than sitting among the teachers in this story, it is the teachers who have come for Jesus. They have come to take him away. And so we see between these two stories that in the early years, the temple is a safe place for Jesus. It seems that it's a place where he can learn and grow and become this person that is regarded well among the human and the divine. But later in life, it becomes less of a blessing. When I was with you day after day in the temple, Jesus says, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. Times have changed, and we can see that profoundly when we compare these two stories early on in Jesus' life to very near to the end of Jesus' life. We can draw out applications then for ourselves in what this specific text that we're looking at today might mean. And while some of us might not feel this way all the time, I think a lot of the time we're probably more like the 12-year-old Jesus in this story. Generally, our lives are pretty safe. We don't face imminent persecution. Now, there are some Christians in the world that do, but for the most part, we have it pretty good. And I hope that, like the temple in Jesus' life when he was 12, that this church is a safe place for each of you to explore in your faith, to grow, to ask questions. And if it's not, we should have a conversation. Also, I think like Jesus when he was 12 years old, we're still growing. And I think Susan illustrated this very well. None of us have made it there yet. We're still growing. We're still maturing. And we can take these opportunities to learn. So as we go through the text in these next few minutes, I hope we can learn a little bit more about what it means to be a disciple of Jesus in our lives at this place, learning, growing, and maturing. So it starts like this. Now, every year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy just stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Now, I don't want us to get too hard on Mary and Joseph. If Jesus is 12, we can probably guess that they have 2, 3, 4, maybe more other children to worry about. And Jesus, being the oldest one, probably should have been fairly responsible for himself, and maybe even helping with some of the younger ones. So let's not get too hard on Mary and Joseph. This isn't a lesson in parenting necessarily. But it's really significant that they point out that Jesus is 12 years old. In that culture, age 13 was kind of your coming of age time. It was when you were more or less seen as an adult. And for the Jewish people, it would be you were then responsible for fulfilling the Torah's requirements. Now, today and for many centuries, Jewish people have practiced what's called a bar mitzvah, which is a formal custom, a sort of rite of passage. We're not clear as to whether that actually existed in Jesus' time, but there would have been some sort of acknowledgement that when he turned 13, he was now accountable for his own actions, and he was eligible to read Torah in his synagogue setting and lead prayer meetings. He would have also gone to Hebrew school, and at 12 years old especially, he would be learning to recite and read from the Hebrew Bible. But of course, Jesus goes above and beyond, as we see in this next few lines. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Jesus went far beyond being able to just read the scripture. He had already started internalizing it, something well above his, what we would call, developmental stage. He's starting to ask questions and understand at a deeper level. Now, we might say, well, Jesus is God. Obviously, he's going to be well beyond. But we should really pay attention and not try to import our ideas of Jesus' divinity, of him being God, onto this text too much, because this text is really about the humanity of Jesus, the way in which Jesus grew, not just physically, but spiritually, intellectually, emotionally. He was becoming more and more human, and that's why at the end it says, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years. He didn't possess all the wisdom when he was born. Maybe he possessed some extra perception abilities. We don't know. That's not laid out in our Bibles. But that's something we often bring to the text. Instead, I invite us to leave that behind and see how this is a story of Jesus growing in his knowledge and understanding, so that we can then see how we can also grow in our knowledge and understanding. Jesus grew by doing things just like this. He asked questions. One person has said before that it's not doubt or questioning that kills faith, but silence. If we don't make space for young people to ask questions, well, it doesn't even have to be young people. All of us have questions. And if we don't make space for us to discover and to converse about our questions that we have, that's the kind of thing that can kill faith at any age. I think young people are especially vulnerable to that because of all the new things that they're learning. But it's really important that we see in this story that Jesus was asking questions, and people were answering them. People were spending time with him for days, in fact. But we also know that Jesus was someone who prayed, someone who earnestly sought learning opportunities. The next part goes, when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you with great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" I love this part because it really exemplifies how Jesus felt at home in his faith community. Just as Mary and Joseph would have felt safe and at home in the caravan going from Jerusalem to their hometown, you know, that whole idea of safety in numbers, Jesus felt safe in the temple and among his community. We hear in these verses that it took at least 3 days for Mary and Joseph to find Jesus. So you have to wonder, well, at least I do, because I'm always thinking about food, who fed Jesus? Well, we don't know for sure, but based on cultural expectations, it was likely whoever was at the temple just said, "Hey, it's time to eat, come on over." There wouldn't have been a surprise or this awkward moment of, what am I going to do? The faith community supported its own. And maybe this is why they have all these genealogies in our Bible, because it was important to know who you belong to. We see in the beginning of both Luke and Matthew's Gospels the tracing of Jesus' genealogy. Maybe he would have found that or used that to find his great third cousin on his mother's side. so he had a place to eat. I think it's also really important and neat that Jesus refers to the temple as his Father's house. Now, we probably don't find this weird because we use this sort of phrases all the time, but it would have been pretty odd in this time. Yes, the temple was a place where God dwelled and sometimes was even called God's house, but Jesus makes it personal. He says, my Father's house. Now, later in Jesus' ministry career, he'd get in trouble for talking about God as his Father because this was a blasphemy. Because in that day, to say someone is your father is to say that you carry the essence of that person. And so if God is your father and you are carrying the essence of God, you are basically saying you are God. And that would have been blasphemy. We are more okay with that because we have sort of this idea of the Trinity, that Jesus is part of the entirety of God. But in his time, that was an issue. There's no pushing back at this point. I like to appreciate this and think of maybe the people around him were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because of his youthfulness. But regardless, I think the important piece here is that Jesus senses a personal connection to God in this place, in the faith community, with God's presence and the presence of God's people. But I think it also exemplifies a shift that's starting to go on in Jesus' life. Just like many teenagers differentiating themselves from their parents, either rebelling in some sort of ways. This often happens in teen years. We note a shift of allegiance for Jesus. One of the most important commandments, especially for children from the Old Testament, was honor your father and mother. And Jesus was doing just that, but he was shifting from his father Joseph to his heavenly Father. And it's not that his earthly parents were no longer any good or of any use to him, but his dependency on them was changing. Later, again, in Jesus' ministry, he would say, "Who is my mother and my brother and sister? Whoever follows the will of my Father in heaven." I think that's the continuation of this sort of thought that's beginning. Jesus is connecting with his heavenly Father and starting to follow him. I think in all of this, we're starting to see that the faith community, in addition to his native family, is the place where Jesus forms his identity as they care for him, as they answer his questions, and they allow him space to ponder. And again, I hope that this church community is that place for each of you. And for me as well. And this last part, but they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. Now, like many parents, and maybe some of you are seeing yourself in this, if you are parents of tweens or teens, you just don't get it. What is this teenager talking about? But that's okay. If that can happen with Mary and Joseph, it's okay for you too. Your kids might say things that you never said, ask about things you've never thought about, or want to do something you've never imagined in following Jesus. But that's okay. As a parent, you can be like Mary and Joseph and be present with them. You can care for them. You can say, okay, let's go home. You can offer advice, but maybe be okay when he doesn't always follow it. And as intimidating, embarrassing, or terrifying as it might just be for the best that they're trying something different, even if they fail. Because as we see in Jesus' life, many great things can come out of that. So I would just encourage you as parents to trust God, to pray like you've never prayed before, and follow Mary's example. That example is that she treasured all of these things in her heart. Now, this is more than just a phrase, a cute little phrase that would be used to say that she thinks her son is the best. Mary's experience actually, in a lot of ways, mirrors Hannah's experience. Hannah was the mother of Samuel. If you think back into the book of 1 Samuel in the Old Testament, Hannah was barren for many years, could not have children, and she prayed and prayed to God that God would give her a child. And she said that if God gave her a child, then she would devote him to God's service. And so she became with child, and once she gave birth to Samuel, he served God in the temple. And it's said on many occasions that she treasured these things in her heart. I think another thing that's significant when we look at Samuel's life and Jesus' life, Samuel was the last leader of Israel before they declared a king. Because in that time, the king was God. God was Israel's king, and Samuel served as an intermediary, someone that would communicate the king's desires. And then we have Jesus coming on the stage as the new king of Israel. Now, another thing I want to point out about this treasuring in the heart. So we think of our heart as a place of feelings, right? The Israelites would have actually considered their gastrointestinal tract or the bowels as their place of feeling. This is where you feel. And they thought of their heart as the place where you think. That's where you process ideas. They didn't have the idea that the brain was anything more than some mushy goop in your head. The heart was the place where you process things. And so if we look back in the Old Testament, we can see how they talk about this. In Genesis, in Psalms, and in Proverbs, it's a place and it's a way of seriously considering and meditating in a way that impacts the way you live your life. So to treasure something in your heart is to really look at something and say, what does that mean? Why is this happening? What does this mean for me and for your life to change as a result? It can't be a fleeting thought. Mary actually treasures things in her heart several times in this early period of Jesus' life, and I think that's what allowed her to follow Jesus throughout Jesus' whole life and be one of the very few that was there at the end of his life. When all the other disciples scattered, Mary was there. And of course, this last little part, Jesus grows in human and divine favor. As I said, I think this is one of those places where Jesus' humanity comes out most. But why is it that he grew in favor? Well, because I think he was living as all humans are designed to, the way we were created by God to live. And in some ways, I think even in our worst places, in our worst times, we pick up on this. When we see somebody doing something kind, something loving, we get that little aw feeling. Because part of us inside knows that's how we are created to be. We're created to care for other people, to be other people-centered, which is exactly what God is like. God is 100% for people. And this verse actually mirrors something from Proverbs 3, where we find the themes of faithfulness, trust, and loyalty to God. So if we're faithful to God and living as God would have us live, we are 100% for people in love and in kindness and in mercy. And we will be just like God in that way. If we trust that God is 100% for people and for us, then we will do as he did, living sacrificially, knowing that God will provide. And if we are loyal to God, who is 100% for people, then our lives will look noticeably different than the rest of the world. So as we reflect more carefully on what this might mean for us, I want us to consider a few questions. Why don't we spend more time in the temple like Jesus did? So think for a moment, how do you connect with God? And how has this grown or changed over your life? Now, a lot of us have different ways that we do that. I know some really like to be in a quiet, dark place. Others want to be out in nature. Others enjoy running or cycling and find that a great way to connect with God, while others need to be still. And these are all good. These are good disciplines that can help us get there. But don't mistake the discipline that helps us connect with God for that connection with God. Unfortunately, running is not a spiritual discipline in and of itself unless it allows you to connect with God. Being still and quiet in a dark place is a good discipline, but unless it helps us connect with God, you might as well not do it. And so I encourage you, as you practice these disciplines, to ensure that it is actually achieving what you're hoping to get out of it. And if it's not, maybe it's time for a change, or maybe it's time for it to grow. I think early in our lives, it's really helpful if, you start reading the Gospels and just reading it for how it is. But as we grow and as we learn more, it's important to consult other people, whether that be people in our lives or maybe books that can encourage us and help us to deepen that. I do believe in the power of Scripture, but I think our intellects need to be challenged as well. Or maybe in your prayer time, you need to look for new prayer exercises that help us to go outside of ourselves, not just providing the laundry list of things that we want or need, but asking God for deeper things. Another question I'd like to ask is, what does it mean to be a part of a faith community? Is church just another place to go and get something for ourselves? Or is church the place we connect with others so that we can become our true selves? Jesus wasn't created overnight. It took 9 months in the womb, just like each one of us. It took 12 years until this point in the story for Jesus to be in the Scriptures, to be praying, to be connecting with his faith community, to be at a place where he could ask these questions, where he could trust that even though he stayed behind and his parents left, that he would be cared for. And as the phrase goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Jesus had his people that he could turn to with his questions that would help to meet his physical needs, that were his partners in ministry later on. In that same way, I think church can be more than a Sunday service, or at least it was supposed to be. And church can be more than a social club, just a place that we come to hang out with our friends. Church was created by Jesus to be a community of people where we could grow in faith and trust and loyalty to God, and a place that we could then go out and serve the world around us. It's one of the ways that we are blessed to be a blessing. We're blessed to have each other so that we can be a blessing to one another, that we can be a blessing to our community, that we can be a blessing to the world. And finally, I want to consider, what do we treasure in our hearts? And how do we share that treasure? In this text, we see Mary treasuring this event and many others in her heart. And like I said, it helps her to follow Jesus into the most difficult of places. When all the other disciples, at least the men, left Jesus behind, Mary and a few other faithful women remained, took Jesus down from the cross, and were ready to prepare him for burial. It was because she treasured these things. She pondered. She thought about them. She considered them. She meditated on all that Jesus had done. It gave her the strength, the courage to go into the deepest and darkest place imaginable. I think that's the difference between simply consuming faith and growing in our faith. While in the beginning, we're just taking things in, much like we would consume, eventually, like a plant in our garden, we bear fruit. For Mary, that was the fruit at the cross, taking her only son, her son off of the cross and burying him, but remaining faithful throughout. That fruit for us may look very different, but it also may lead us into a challenging place, and hopefully we rely on God for the courage to be there. So may we, as a community of God's people, as the followers of Jesus, do likewise. Amen.